So this afternoon, I'm talking with Tanya Motie, who is a TV executive with a huge amount of experience. Afternoon, Tanya.
Hi, Robin.
I'm going to jump straight in with some questions. So having worked as a broadcast journalist for over 30 years, actually what I want to go back to is how and why did you get into journalism in the first place?
It's an interesting one, and that's it's because right from a very, very early age, I was just fascinated with the idea of TV. And my mum was a cleaner. We lived in London, and she worked for some. She worked cleaning people's houses, and some of them were somebody came up with questions for a children's TV show, and that was their job, was to come up with these questions for something called Screen Test. And then somebody else was a set designer, and somebody else was a TV director, and their jobs just seemed so exciting. I couldn't quite believe they were paid for doing these kind of things. And once or twice I was lucky enough to go with them and their children to go and see some of the things happening. And I just thought, what an incredible thing. So I then decided, because we lived in the shadow of Television Centre, I lived in Shepherd's Bush, that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to work for the BBC and have a fun life.
Brilliant.
And actually, the one thing I would say about that is my mum was a cleaner, and my mum said to me that I could do whatever I wanted to do. And if that's the job that I wanted, then good, go for it. So there was no, so when I then started encountering barriers, I didn't really understand it because I couldn't see why there should be barriers. So I think the thing that I keep thinking about is that belief, if you have something that you really, really, really want to do, that can power you through so much stuff.
If I'm not mistaken, your early career started at Guild Television at the University of Birmingham. How much do you think that helped you? I think that, we hear lots about internships, and volunteering and stuff like that. How much do you think kind of informal stuff to start with helped you in your later career?
Massively, because of the fact that I'd focused quite my whole life really to working for the BBC. I think that it really, all of those things are incredibly important. So whenever I had any free time, I would try and do work experience in the local newspapers. I would try and write articles and send off articles to different magazines. And I did all of that while I was doing my O-levels then, but GCSEs, and through A-levels. So I was doing all of that before I turned up at university. But I always knew the very first thing I'd do on day one would be sort of go and find all the student media, see whether they had a radio station, a TV station, and just make sure that I got myself involved in that. And I just did that on day one. And so that was, again, just another way for me to try to develop my ideas, develop my skill base, to try and hone my ability and to really work out what it was that I wanted, because I knew I wanted to work at the BBC, but I wasn't really quite sure whether it was as a journalist or whether or not it was more in entertainment or whatever. So that gave me the freedom to explore.
Can you remember what your first paid job was, what your last paid job was or is, and actually in your career, probably what your most favourite job was?
Oh, that's really difficult. I think that the problem was I did all of this stuff. I worked so hard for many years on stuff that didn't get paid. And then it was a real shock to me when I then sent off application forms and didn't even get interviews. I think in that first 6 months, just leaving university, and trying to get into the world of work, I sent off 120 applications, and I probably only got about 5 or 6 responses, and I think I got one interview. And at the interview, they made it very clear that it had been a mistake to ask me along. So it was terrible. It was terrible, terrible, terrible. So I can remember very much, very clearly, the very first time I did get paid. And that was, I got some work experience working for the BBC World Service. I was working for the African service because I did African studies as part of my university degree. And so I was doing unpaid work experience there, and it was fantastic and it was wonderful. And by accident, a new person turned up on the same day that I did in a new program area, and they were the new producer, and they thought I was a new reporter rather than the work experience person. So they asked me whether I would go and make a feature, and I said yes. And then the guy went out of the room, and this old guy, lovely old guy, just looked at me and went, "Are you sure you can do this?" And I went, "No." He said, "Would you like to do this?" Yes. And he was incredibly kind. He was an old boy. He had nothing to lose. He was called Roger Ketz-Kemerty. I remember him incredibly well. And he asked me what I would do with this feature, what I would like to hear in it. He thought they were really good ideas, and so he helped me. And so together, we put together this feature. I wrote the script. He reworked it for me. He helped me record it, and it went out on air. And afterwards, the editor of the programme just said, "But the new reporter phoned in sick this morning." And I had to come clean. So a few people were a bit cross, but a couple of people were quite full of praise for the fact that I had the initiative. Roger got into a lot of trouble, but I got paid, and that was the first time I was paid, and I've still got that remittance advice. It was amazing, but that just gave me so much confidence. But also, it was another life lesson, and that is allies. We need allies. There was that one man who was just so kind and who effectively gave me my first break. And I think that's another bit of takeout that I've learned, and that's something that I always try and do in everything that I do, is to, if you see people who are really trying hard, that helping them and giving them a leg up is incredibly important. My last paid job, well, my proper last paid job at the BBC was when I was the channel exec for BBC One and BBC Three. And that was a fantastic job, and that was really, really good fun because you're involved in everything to do with the channel. So you were involved in helping to shape what the channel was doing. You were involved in all the commissioning decisions, and that was a very exciting job to have. But probably running a show called Exchange, which was just wonderful, and that was with about 60 people in the production team, incredibly diverse because we employed the people we wanted to. So lots of disabled people, lots of people who were Black and Asian and Jewish, and lots of people from all sorts of backgrounds. And it was just fun.
Which leads me really nicely to the next question. You've been pivotal in launching a number of disabled actors' careers. How and why did you use your position to create such a positive launch pad?
I think it's not been so much actors, although I have helped with actors. I think it's probably more on the production side of things where I've been able to help launch people's careers. And I think one of the things that I realised, and I think it probably goes back to those very early days about when it was that I got a break and how, is that the landscape, the media landscape, and the broadcasting landscape is only going to change when you have people in positions of power, in positions of authority, who can make a difference. Because you can have all of the schemes that you like and all of the entry-level stuff that you like just so that people feel that they're doing something. But you can only get structural change when you have people who are making the decisions who to employ and how to employ it, and to make sure that the environment is an environment where people can give their best. Or one of the things that I found really important is critical mass. It's incredibly hard when you go into a big production and you're the only non-white person there, you're the only person there with a visible disability, you may not speak in the same way as other people. It makes it very difficult for you to give of your best. So I'm a real believer in creating environments where there is critical mass of different people with lived experiences, then it feels like we could just be ourselves and get on with the work.
You've hinted that quite strongly, I guess, that you have experienced barriers as a disabled woman and someone of mixed heritage. But for our viewers, if you could give one or two pieces of sage-like advice, for anyone who wants to move into a career around journalism, whether it be presenter, writer, or production, what would you say to them?
It's a few different things. I think that sadly, if you are somebody who is different in any way, shape, or form, that is incredibly powerful, and that's incredibly important, and that's something that you should hold on to. The flip side of that is that people often subconsciously are not great with difference, and so therefore there is that expectation that you might not be as good as another person. So one of the things that I always say to people is, I know it's hard, but really, really do your homework. So if you are applying for a job, just try and do everything you can to understand exactly what it is that they may be looking for. You need to nourish yourself and you need to build your own confidence. And that means being part of a network. There are lots of fantastic networks around that really help. I'm just thinking, obviously, the work that you're doing, Robin, is incredibly important. And then there are things like DANC, the Disabled Artists Networking Community. There are lots of different organisations out there. Be part of something so that you don't feel like you're isolated and separate, and nourish yourself and feel confident about what it is that you have to offer. And then I think the third thing I would say is it is a pain having to do things like sending off articles for nothing and writing stuff and maybe doing reviews of things. But I think it's incredibly good at honing your craft and honing your ability. So I would do all of that, because when you go for an interview, if you can just show the range of stuff that you've done, even if you're not paid for it, that again means that you are immediately ahead of lots of the other competition. Finally, try and see if you can work out who your allies are, particularly when you go into an organisation. Try and work out who your allies are, because allies will really help. And then also just think about people who you like and who might work well for you as a mentor. People are usually very, very flattered if you ask them for advice, and they're usually only too happy to give it. And it's a great way of building up your own network. All the way through my career, I've had different allies or different mentors, and they've just been incredible.
Amazing advice. And I wish you best in all you do to carry on.
Thank you very much.